Good afternoon. I'm Professor Steve Larkin and I welcome you here to the University of Adelaide. And as I just said, I'd first like to thank a Chasm alumni, Tilly Charla Thomas, for her beautiful music as we arrived here today. So thank you, Tilly. I acknowledge and pay my respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians on whose ancestral lands we gather on this afternoon, and I acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and we respect and value their past, present and ongoing connection to land and cultural beliefs. In my role as Pro Vice-Chancellor Indigenous Engagement at World Yalo, I lead the University's strategic and operational commitments to enhancing the participation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in higher education, and in doing so helping to position the University as a leader in engagement with Indigenous communities. But before I go any further, or we go any further, I'd like to introduce Kaurna Elder, Uncle Rod O'Brien, who's our Wurrtjili Yalu Cultural Advisor at the Uni. And at Wurrtjili Yalu, we're fortunate to have the cultural guidance of Uncle Rod. To the University, he brings a wealth of experience, knowledge and pride, and culture, and a willingness to share, teach and grow. Rod's a proud Kaurna man and devotes much time to helping other Kaurna people identify with the language and culture. He's an active member of the Adelaide Aboriginal community, volunteering his time as a chairperson on a number of committees which include Kaurna Warra, Carpentry Aboriginal Corporation, Kaurna Yurta Aboriginal Corporation and Kura Yulo. Sadly, he's a Port Adelaide supporter. Rod has an honours and bachelor's degree in applied science and Aboriginal community development and management from Curtin University, and prior to joining Wurrtjili Yalu, he worked in the state government for over 23 years in the Department for Child Protection. Rod's passionate about reclaiming Kaurna language and hopes to see Kaurna language and culture being taught in every school in the Adelaide Plains region. And in recognition of his contribution to the preservation and promotion of Kaurna culture and language, Uncle Rod was named a finalist for the Local Hero Award as part of the 2021 South Australian of the Year Awards. Now, following Uncle Rod's welcome, Robert Taylor will lead us in the smoking ceremony. Robert comes from 4 language groups: Kaurna from the Adelaide Plains, Nurunga from Yorke Peninsula, Ngaraku from River Murray and Nurrunjeri from Lower River Murray and Coorong region, who for many years has been learning, living and sharing his culture locally, nationally and internationally. So you'll be invited to stand and come around the fire pit as guided by Robert. But firstly, can I please welcome Uncle Rod to the stage to welcome us to country.
That's a big step. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to come and do the welcome, and especially invite for Marcia to come to Adelaide and again, and always welcome for you to come, Marcia, and but also welcome to everyone to come and listen tonight. Might be a few things said that you mightn't agree with, but we're going to speak from the heart, and just to say that. My passion, as Steve said, is language. It's also Port Adelaide. He's a Collingwood supporter, so bad luck for him, even though he's a premier. But premiership, you can't beat that. But there's only one way down from the top. So anyway, we won't talk about football. The footy season's over. But anyway, just to say that we hope, the Kaurna people hope, that our language will be taught on all the schools on the Adelaide Plains, because we believe it's not only our language, it's the language of the country. And if you know our language, you'll know our country better. If you know our country better, you'll care for the country better. If you care for our country, the country will care for you. But also, our people, Kaurna people, educators, we held conferences in our country because we believe that no one individual or nation of people had the monopoly on knowledge. We could all learn from one another. And we could work together better if we know each other better and learn from each other. You only have to look at the world today and see what a mess it's in because of people not working together to solve problems instead of wanting to be greedy and take over other people's country. we stopped wars in our country over 60,000 years ago. That's not to say we didn't have arguments, but we resolved them in a civilised manner, you know, where people can talk to one another and resolve problems, not go to war, and because war stops people from living a good life. Even when you think you win from war, you lose, because the cost of war is untold on humanity. Anyway, I'm not preaching anymore tonight, but just to say that I'm pleased to give the welcome and hope that everyone enjoys the night. Machawanga Gana Mena Nai Wangari, Mani Nabudni, Gana Yatana, Naberko Mankalankla, Tananya Meanaku, Nachi Ungadaya, Nachi Akandaya, Padniadu Wadu. So on behalf of the Ghana people, I welcome the Ghana country. I do as ambassador of the Adelaide Plains people. My brothers, my sisters, let's walk together in harmony. Natalia, thank you.
All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are we? Deadly? We like to use the term deadly in a non-venomous way. Are we deadly? Thank you very much, Uncle Rod, for that very educational and wonderful welcome. It's always a pleasure to hear you speak and bless people with language and, of course, with our connection here to country. Today it's a great occasion, I think, because we have the opportunity to stand alongside Uncle Rod, along with my daughter, and it shows 3 different generations, I guess, up here to be a part of this ceremony. So for those of you who know about the smoking ceremony and the cleansing ceremony, it's something we've done in this country for a millennia, since the time of creation. And it's a way that we connect with our ancestors and also closely and in-depthly with the country. We have a strong spiritual connection to our land, and what better way to do it and cleanse our spirit than with a ceremony that we could share together. So tonight, this process here isn't just about myself or other custodians of this land, but it's about all of us. And it's the Kaurna people, the First Nations people, that get the opportunity to share this with you today, but we can all come together as one. Now, we're going to do this in the most orderly fashion that we can, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so we've got a few of us here, but for those of you that are able to come up and pull this smoke over you, throw the smoke over you, I ask you that when you do this process that you silence your mind, yeah? An elder once said to me, they said, "Nephew, our spirit and our soul, it knows what it needs to do to heal itself, but the hard part is silencing the mind." Very, very powerful words. So something that I continue to share out here in community, especially with the border community and also the younger generation. So as you come forward, ladies and gentlemen, and you pull this smoke over you, I ask you that you embrace it. You silence your mind and open your spirit. And what we're going to do here with this process is we're going to get all of our ancestors to come together as one and sit down here and be present with us. So I was thinking maybe if we started up the front here and maybe along this side, if we come around this way, and then when these fellows have gone back to their seats, if we could maybe have these fellows from this side here maybe come up in some orderly fashion, and we'll get through it, ladies and gentlemen. But just be mindful of those who are less able than others who do come up as well, please, and cleanse themselves. So I'm going to acknowledge this instrument here, the humble didgeridoo, Yiraki, and I'm going to acknowledge the people of Arnhem Land, the traditional owners of this wonderful instrument, by saying Mangmak Yongle. We're just saying thank you in their language. I stand alongside Uncle Rod when we acknowledge each and every one of you here today, and equally as important, the delegates and dignitaries and people who've travelled far and wide, and we ask that you are blessed down here on Kaurna country with the spirit of our ancestors. Nachalia, thank you.
So, going on our way. Thank you, Uncle Rod, and thank you, Robert, for that. So I think everyone's well and truly smoked, and we can go forward. Thank you. So today's event is the 4th in the Make History speaker series for 2023. And the series brings together university alumni and high-profile community group, leaders, exploring the challenges of the past, present, and future. For our final Make History speaker series event for the year, we welcome distinguished Australian Aboriginal anthropologist, geographer and activist, distinguished Professor Marcia Langton AO, to deliver her keynote speech. The theme of this event, Voice, Treaty, Truth, What's Next?, is an opportunity to reflect on the federal Voice to Parliament referendum result, the impact on Aboriginal people, and navigate the path forward for our nation. Professor Langton's a proud Yiman and Bidjara woman from central Queensland. In 1993, she was made a member of the Order of Australia in recognition of her work in anthropology and the advocacy of Aboriginal rights. Since 2000, she's held the Foundation Chair of Australian Indigenous Studies at the University of Melbourne, and in 2016, she was honoured as the Redmond Barry Distinguished Professor. In 2017, Professor Langton was appointed as the first Associate Provost at the University of Melbourne. She's one of Australia's most prominent policy advisors and public intellectuals. She was a crucial figure in the development of the Indigenous Voice to Parliament. She was co-chair of the Voice Co-Design Senior Advisory Group with Professor Tom Calma during the Morrison government. She's also a co-host of the podcast The Deep End with Marcia Langton and Aaron Corn, with whom she also recently co-authored the book Law, the Way of the Ancestors. Today, Professor Langton joins us for a keynote speech, which will be followed by a conversation with our guest panel. So please join me in welcoming Distinguished Professor Marcia Langton.
Thanks very much, Steve. Thank you, Rod, for a very beautiful welcome to country. I very much appreciate that. What a mighty job you do. I should be home doing the same thing, actually. Anyway, thank you also to Robert Taylor. Is that right? Yes. And your daughter, is it? Yes. Beautiful. Thank you so much. So this is more of a keynote chat because it's a big topic. So I put together some notes because, you know, obviously the topic of truth-telling has become the new catch cry, and I'm a little worried about that. It was one of the three linchpins of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, Voice, Treaty, Truth. And I see yesterday Minister Linda Burney, Minister for Indigenous Affairs, the Honourable Minister Linda Burney, and Tom Calma, Professor Tom Calma AO, were in the media. I think they were on Patricia Karvelis's Radio National show, talking about truth-telling as a way forward. And today, Senator Patrick Dodson, who is retiring because of illness, called also for honesty and honesty and integrity, and I think he, you know, wanted to use the word truth-telling, but perhaps avoided it to avoid a political showdown with the other side. So, do we need truth-telling? Well, yes, but then you run into the question, what is truth? We see that during the referendum campaign, truth copped a pretty savage hiding. The case against the Voice and constitutional recognition from the opposition and their fellow travellers was based on a series of terrible lies, and I'll go through some of them. And we realise now, with the outcome of the vote, 61% of voters voted no, 39% voted yes. I thank all of you who voted yes. I thank everyone who helped us campaign for it. But what I want to move on to talk about is the problem of truth-telling. So let me start with some of my notes, because obviously I've been thinking about this for a long time. We all know that telling the truth can be dangerous. So if there's a fight over something at home and the kids don't think they're getting a fair deal, we all tell little white lies, don't we? It's exactly half. You got exactly the same. Stop carrying on. Sometimes that works. Sometimes kids get out the measuring stick and measure the piece of pie, and the fight goes on. So then we call them, little white lies, but then there are big lies. And one of the projects that I've been involved in for 7 years and pushing very hard is our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander curriculum project based on Indigenous knowledge themes to put curriculum into schools about not just Indigenous histories and cultures, but also Indigenous knowledge. Of course, this does not happen systematically. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures is the third cross-curriculum priority in the Australian curriculum framework, and most teachers regard it as completely optional. They don't regard the other two cross-curriculum priorities in the framework as optional, sustainability and Asia. They teach those, but they simply choose, as if they have the freedom to choose, to not teach Indigenous histories and cultures. So it's a mythology that it's optional. They should be teaching it. But of course, no one can force them. And those who do often run into opposition from principals, parents and teachers associations. And, if you're in Western New South Wales, some pretty wild white fellas out there who, will get the teachers sacked or moved. So, but we're determined that 3,000 schools or more in Australia should have access to rigorous, reliable resources and freely available, so that there are no excuses from the teachers. The excuses are, and maybe it's valid in some contexts, but these are the ones we hear all the time. We've done the surveys, we've done the focus groups. I don't want to be accused of being racist, so I'm not going to teach it because I could be accused of being racist. So, that's the Monty Python kind of, out. Of course I'm racist, but I don't want anybody to see that I'm racist. Then there's, well, I just don't know what's reliable and what isn't. How do I know which Indigenous curriculum to use? So anyway, there are plenty more of these, sand-in-your-face strategies that they use. And to overcome it, we have developed resources and will continue to do so. We're being funded to do so. Have a look at our website, ngarrnga.org, ngarrnga.org, and you can have a look. So why are we doing this? I've been working on it for 7 years, and we now have quite a big team of people working on it. Well, because we hear all the time, I didn't learn about any of this in school. Well, of course you didn't. They don't teach it, and they still don't teach it. They don't teach Indigenous histories and cultures. And what is the big lie? Well, the big lie is the version of Australian history that's taught in schools because it excludes us. That's the big lie. And so why did 61% of Australian voters vote no in the referendum? Because they're fed lies. They're fed lies all through school and in university, in the newspapers, from a couple of political parties and various associations. I see, you know, sort of the average age here is about 60. So many of you will remember Ruxton, president of the RSL, who said repeatedly that Aborigines didn't fight for Australia. Well, since he moved on to the other world, there's a small army of researchers, especially at the War Memorial in Canberra, and over in Western Australia, there's a Department of Aboriginal Affairs History Unit, and elsewhere in Australia, who have identified and continue to identify all of those Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who served in the Australian Defence Forces and in the British military right back to the Boer War. And so we know that, you know, there's between, look, at last count, I think it was about, they've counted 1,000 Indigenous men who fought in World War One. And, you know, the numbers keep rising. And then, of course, there's the Australian Wars. If you have time, watch Rachel Perkins' excellent 3-part documentary series, Australian Wars. And, you know, she profiles the latest research on what we used to call the frontier wars. But let's call them what they are. They're the Australian Wars. When I first started at the University of Melbourne 25 years ago, I was asked to speak at the Alfred Deakin lectures. And the topic was, you know, what do we have to say about Australia, which was so peacefully settled? And I was like, what? So that's when I wrote my paper, Dominion and Dishonour, and went through all the efforts at treaties that Aboriginal people had undertaken since colonisation began. It's quite an interesting history. So then, you know, I had long been a big fan of Henry Reynolds and Lyndall Ryan and other historians who refused, as young historians back in the 70s, to peddle the British Empire propaganda, which is what is taught in schools. And so they wrote wonderful books, many, many books. And more recently, Lyndall Ryan has led a project at Newcastle University called the Frontier Massacres. And she and a team of historians are documenting, going through the records and doing the body count of all the massacres, and they're plotting them on a map. It's an interactive map, so you can click on the map and then, you know, get access to the records that they used. They'll give you the body count, the dates and so on. So hundreds of massacre sites, hundreds. Now, why do I say all of that, which many of you probably already know? Well, because we saw during the referendum campaign that people on the no side were raising all of the old tropes, right, which are massive lies. And, you know, Jeffrey Blaney escaped and started carrying on about how there were censuses of Aboriginal people before 1971. What he failed to tell the Australian public in his extended radio interviews was that they weren't national censuses, and they were deeply flawed, and the first national census run by the Commonwealth Government and, through the Australian Bureau of Statistics was indeed in 1971. And we had very little idea of how many Aboriginal people there were before that. And even then, the census was flawed, and it took many years for the census to, convince Aboriginal people to fill out the forms, and Torres Strait Islander people too. So now we're about between 3 and 4% of the population. There's, between 800 and 900,000 of us. Soon we'll reach 1 million people. But, that was just one of the big little lies that Jeffrey Blaney told during the referendum campaign. The big lie, which was ferociously propagated by Senator Jacinta Price and Warren Mundine, is that the referendum question racially divided Australia. Now, and it doesn't matter how many of us said it over and over again, they simply repeated the mantra. The referendum question was racially divisive. A voice is racially divisive. Constitutional recognition is racially divisive. Marcia Langton is racially divisive. Here's the thing. There's no such thing as race. Race died as a concept decades ago, but at least 61% of Australians haven't caught up with the science. So the human genome was mapped, starting, back when I was young, a young undergraduate. I remember meeting genome scientists at the Australian National University in the 1970s. And what all of the human genome mapping tells us is that there are no races. But we knew that long ago. We knew that after World War II, when the United Nations set up a special think tank to tackle racism because of the Holocaust and because of the upsurge in, various kinds of racism after World War II. And anthropologists were recruited, and they tried to explain to the United Nations back then, and there were papers published, that, there's no such thing as race, because even then, before the human genome had been mapped, they knew that, if you took blood types, we knew about blood types back then, blood types don't map onto races. I could be B, and the whitest person in this audience could be B. So, and actually, as time went on, we began to realise when, after, the DNA revolution, that our species, has a great deal in common with other species. And that, the difference between our species and another species can actually be closer than than we imagine. So the whole concept of race was long ago rejected by science. The problem is it remains in our constitution because our constitution was written by racists who believed that they were members of the superior race and that all other races were inferior. So this is what Australians were voting for. They were voting for that concept of humanity peddled by two Aboriginal people, Senator Jacinta Price and Warren Mundine, and the Liberal Party and the National Party and the neo-Nazis and the anti-vaxxers and various other nutters out there. So, we just can't convince people that the science is settled, that there are no races. What we wanted was recognition of First Peoples. Now, there are hundreds of First Peoples in Australia, and there are huge differences between us. Huge differences. So Robert acknowledged Yolngu people. They're very, very different from the rest of us. My people from southwest Queensland were written about in the records as the copper-coloured people, the early records, the copper-coloured people. And most Australians have their idea of what an Aboriginal person looks like from, the 5-penny stamp or the 6-penny stamp and the 1 penny, right? So you have to stand on a rock, on a ridge somewhere, hold a spear, put, one leg up on your knee, and you have to have a huge flat nose. And if you haven't got the huge flat nose, then you're just not Aboriginal enough and you have to be really black. Well, there's 800,000 of us, and the British, the Irish, the Scottish, and I could go on and on. In Melbourne there's 260 languages and ethnicities, have been here for 250 years, and yet you all still want us to be really black. I'm not going to talk about why. And in fact, originally people were not black. Read the records about the Kaurna people. They were written about as, their skin colour was described. And, it's quite a beautiful stanza because there were some interesting relationships between settlers and Kaurna people here. And they certainly were not described as black-skinned. And I've seen the early drawings, beautiful, beautiful drawings of Kaurna people, and, they haven't got the big flat nose and the skinny ankles. I do. I have the skinny ankles, the really skinny ankles. But I'm from up north and there's a reason for that. But anyway, if you look at the old photos, there's a huge variation. In Queensland, everybody that I know has got the long, narrow nose, flared nostrils, yes, but long, narrow long nose. Up in the Cape, people are really black, but it's just not the case anywhere else. So huge physical variations, huge linguistic variations. Because of gambe.com.au, we know now that there are more than 600 language varieties, probably about 650 language varieties. So we have societies that speak languages with their kinship systems and their own sacred narratives. They're peoples. And, that's long accepted in political science. It's the same in Europe. Australians talk about the European race. There's no such thing as the European race. There are European peoples. So we wanted acceptance as peoples. But no, all Peter Dutton and his mates had to do was raise the spectre of race, and Australians fell for it. And then also, I wasn't wrong. I gave a talk over in Bunbury, and one of the local farmers was sitting there recording me, but didn't ask me, didn't ask the organisers, and he sent the video to Shari Markson, who then, used a bit of it and typically misrepresented what I had to say. What I said was, I suspect that 20% of Australians are hardcore racists, and there's another significant proportion who are just plain stupid. So, at that time, the polls were showing that, there was more than 40% were going to vote no. And I said, we have to at least try to get through to, the undecideds and the people who believe nonsense. We have to get through to them somehow. So I was then quoted all through the Murdoch media as saying that Australians are stupid and racist. Well, I wasn't far wrong, was I? Wasn't that far off the mark. So now all over the world, diplomats, and they've rung me, they've spoken to me, and they're asking, what happened in Australia? Australians look like idiots in international circles where matters of human rights and, peacekeeping, conflict resolution are discussed, because Australia has rejected the recognition of its Indigenous people and the rejection of the most minimal democratic kind of political institution that you could imagine. For some reason, Peter Dutton and his friends think it's a horribly radical concept. Well, if you read your constitution, And, you know, it's just over 70 pages long. It's incredibly boring. But have a look. There are bodies in it, just like The Voice, because that's how democracy operates. Democracy isn't just the federal parliament and our state parliaments. Our democracy consists of a pretty sophisticated network of commissions, all kinds of bodies, the Reserve Bank, the ABC, SBS, you know, lots and lots of kinds of commissions, and the court, the High Court, the Supreme Court, the court system, and so on. And to ask for an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice was to ask for the most minimal kind of democratic body that could assist us to close the gaps on the most appalling social indicators in this country. Now, all of the material about closing the gap is available to anybody in the world. All over the world, people know that we are statistically the most incarcerated people on earth. Today, at least 22,000 Aboriginal children are in out-of-home care. They've been forcibly removed from their families. And I see that Sandra Kramer's son is representing parents in a class action because, you know, it's gone past in any way being excusable. So we're going to observe how this class action operates. There have been royal commissions after royal commissions about deaths in custody, incarceration of youth, removal of children, domestic violence, and yet we cannot close the gap. Why is that? Because we don't have a voice. And now we will never have a voice. So we have to be very inventive, and I doubt very much that a truth-telling process is going to work. Yes, of course, we must tell the truth. Not all of us do. Bruce Lehrmann in the court admitted to at least 5 lies in the last few days. You know, but truth is a standard, isn't it? And, you know, the court can assess facts. Royal commissions can assess facts. There have been truth commissions, reconciliation and truth commissions all around the world. There was the Canadian one, which produced a 6-volume report, incredible report. It resulted in a little bit of justice for all of those families whose children were taken to residential colleges. And of course, during the course of that inquiry and subsequently, the truth starts to come out. Those residential colleges had been burying children in their backyards in their hundreds because they couldn't keep them alive. God knows what happened to those children. So South Africa famously had its Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and in order to find out what happened to people during their civil war, they had to give, from the outset, everybody amnesty so that they would give evidence, because families just wanted to find out what happened to their family members who'd disappeared. Morocco's had one. Look at the list. They've happened all over the place, and with some very interesting outcomes. In Australia, we've never had such a thing. We have the URIC, Truth and Justice Commission in Victoria, and because it is peopled entirely by Victorian Aboriginal people, they spent the first year dealing with the issue of trauma. Because once people start telling their stories, the process of telling the truth re-traumatises them and re-traumatises their families. So, you know, it's taken a long time to get anywhere with that Truth Commission, but more recently, in evidence given by senior public servants, we've had a few apologies There was an apology to Victorian Aboriginal people from the most senior public servant responsible for child protection, as they call it, and also from the police commissioner. So they do lead to some improvements. Will we ever have one in Australia? You know, I seriously doubt it, because we know now, in the age of social media, bots and algorithms, that the people who do not want us to succeed will lie. They will not only lie on a grand scale, they will lie repeatedly, second by second, using algorithms and bots, as they did during the referendum campaign. And they will rely on the old racist tropes, the old political tropes. You know, I was just talking to educators yesterday and the week before. This is the kind of stuff I have to deal with all the time. Most people think that Aborigines couldn't count. What? Where do they get that idea from? It's an absolute nonsense, but every white teacher I've ever run into, and now the immigrant teachers as well, think that Aboriginal people can't count. In the Catholic schools in the Kimberley, they don't teach Aboriginal kids mathematics because there's no point. And one of their arguments is not only that, according to them, Aboriginal people can't count, but the world was created in 7 days. They only need to count to 7. So, you know, we're really up against it. So, but that's not the only lie. I could go on and on. I'm probably going on for too long. But there are so many stupid racist tropes about us. We have a long, long future ahead for our future generations to tackle these tropes. We're tackling the Aborigines Can't Count one in our curriculum project. Please give us a hand with that. But please read the literature on race and do not be conned by the race arguments. But then there's all the sneaky stuff that goes with it. So I don't have time to give you a lecture on that, but I just want to say truth-telling is a dangerous exercise, and 61% of Australians were so easily trapped in a monstrous campaign of lies. We can be grateful for the 39% who voted yes and the army of 80,000 people who helped us, but what a job we have to get through to the 61% that the question was not racially divisive. There are no races. We belong to peoples. Each one of us here has been introduced by, you know, our language names. I was introduced as a proud Yiman woman. And I'm certainly not a member of an inferior race, you know. I know most people think that, but, you know, no, it's not true. And I don't even know how we're going to deal with this, but we certainly have to change our institutions, our schools, and some of our disciplines who continue to leave the truth out of the curriculum at the school and university level. But it'll come up again and again and again. So I can only keep saying truth is dangerous, but the truth has to be based on facts. And when the science is settled, there are facts. When the court case is ended, we may not always agree with the court case or the Royal Commission, but at least the facts are laid out and we can make our own assessments. So I hope Australians are not so lacking in self-respect in the future that they'll fall for that dreadful slogan, if you don't know, vote no. See, as citizens, you have a responsibility to know. You do, you have a responsibility to know, because the state provides you with an education. And that is because you have obligations as a citizen. You do have an obligation too, by the way, to know what's in your constitution. And to understand your constitution. that's going to be very difficult now with all the lies that have been told about our Constitution. In any case, I'll stop there. I thank you very much for listening to me, and I look forward to hearing the other speakers.
Thank you, Professor Langton, and I'm particularly appreciative. I asked Marcia if she could speak at this some time ago when we launched her book here, and she didn't hesitate to say yes. And despite, I guess, the events of the last 6 months, 12 months that Marcia's been there, she's, I'd say, very exhausted, and she tells me she's starting leave next week. But she still honoured this commitment despite that, so very appreciative. I'd now like to invite the panel to the stage, and our first panellist is Aaron Hazelbane. He's the Associate Director of Aboriginal Practice and Partnerships at the Department of Human Services. He's a proud Waray Ngugutha man with cultural connections to the Finniss River region in the Northern Territory and the Far West Coast in South Australia. Aaron's held various positions across the state government and served on a range of committees working on policy and strategic initiatives. And I just remembered I didn't have my glasses on, so I couldn't see them. Aaron's also was a South Australian delegate to the First Nations National Constitutional Convention in Uluru and a proud signatory to the Uluru Statement from the Heart. So let's please welcome Aaron. Thank you. Now, joining Aaron is Commissioner for Aboriginal Children and Young People, April Laurie. Mirning Ngugutha woman, April is dedicated to creating generational change for all children. And for more than 30 years, April's led systemic reform in Aboriginal health, justice, education and child protection. And as the inaugural Commissioner for Aboriginal Children and Young People, April leads the work that promotes the rights, development and the well-being of Aboriginal children and young people within South Australia. April is also the co-founder of the Jindu Foundation, a not-for-profit organisation that works to promote well-being, cultural resilience and school retention for Aboriginal young people in communities across South Australia. And she's also a passionate advocate for government service reform and child protection and for land rights within native title. She was recognised for her contribution to our South Australian community with a nomination for the 2024 South Australian of the Year. Please welcome April. And our final panellist, who I've introduced before, I'd like to welcome back to the stage is Kaurna Elder Uncle Rod O'Brien. So please join me in welcoming the panellists. So I've just got a couple of questions for you, and perhaps we'll just go in turn. Okay. So what's your take on the referendum result?
Ladies first. Can you all hear me? Excellent. Well, I'm going to be brutally honest. For me, whilst it certainly left myself and many absolutely devastated, I believe it actually exposed the true psyche of the wider Australian community. Two simple questions proposed to the Australian community. And if you hold negative, racist, stereotypical views about Aboriginal people or what you believe is the right thing for Aboriginal people, it doesn't take much distraction, whether it be Senator Price or Warren Mundine or Peter Dutton, to enable you in that secret ballot to put that mark on the card to truly reflect what you think and believe is right for Aboriginal people. So for me, what I say is that the referendum result itself was an expose of what is really pulsating throughout the community of Australia, the wider community. And for all those who voted yes, it is nothing but respect and admiration that there are people that stand with us. But it truly told how paternalism is really rife across the wider community about holding on to that level of power and controlling someone's destiny is what really bothered me in terms of the result. There are so many ways that I've sat back with family, friends, colleagues to try and dissect what that result showed. And so in thinking about what that means, then we'll hopefully determine a way forward, which we're going to talk about in the other questions.
Rod or Aaron?
I'll follow on from Annie April, and I just have to start by saying that I'm very honoured to have been asked to join the panel tonight to listen to Marcia, who, for many young emerging Aboriginal leaders, does play a critical role in informing the way that we think about things really analytically. And, you know, in the same way that we look for that level of leadership within our own communities, where, you know, I and many others that I'm aware of are very attuned with the views and leadership of Marcia. And, you know, I think it's just great to be here and listen to her share some truths about the result of the referendum. I'll probably dial back a little bit pre the actual date and the result. I was really fortunate to be involved in the process that led to the referendum, and back after the report that was released by Marcia and Tom, an uncle of mine from the Territory, I was very fortunate to be asked to be a part of the dialogue here in South Australia. And at that time, Uncle Clinton Wanganeen and Auntie Cheryl Laxelby, who were the state facilitators, asked me to present on the race power. And I thought I had my work cut out from the get-go because, you know, this state has a really unique relationship with that power. Its application within our state and the Territory, namely, has led to some really devastating and long-standing impacts in our communities. And, you know, I remember, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind me sharing this, but I remember Uncle Clinton Wanganeen sharing a story with me about his mother, Nana Doreen, or Nana Dodo, as many people would know her, who spoke about if they built that bridge, and you look what's happened. You know, if we fast forward to the National Constitutional Convention, you know, it was an extreme honour, I think, to be perhaps the youngest person in the room, in a room full of heavyweights. I think crafting what was going to be our question that we would put to the Australian people. In the 2 weeks leading to the referendum, I'd undertaken some pretty intensive campaigning, stretching right from you know, the most remote parts over on the far west coast, Fowler's Bay, pastoralist heartland, right through to Mount Gambier. And I've never experienced such grotesque racism in your face. And, you know, I thought I'd experienced my fair share of racism growing up in Darwin, living in metropolitan Adelaide, growing up over on the far west coast, Port Lincoln, you know, having travelled to Ceduna many of times, but I've never experienced racism like I experienced in those 2 weeks leading up to the referendum. And I think what that, you know, it's probably a long-winded kind of explanation that I think what the referendum has revealed, if anything, are some truths, are some facts. And it's really positioned us in a way, I think, that we can't, you know, there's no curtain dressing around, you know, the bearing weight that others place on First Nations people. We've got a challenge ahead of us, and I think it's going to take some time to work through what that, you know, what the next steps look like.
Thanks, Aaron. Rod?
Yeah. I don't know, really, it's a hard thing to say what to take of the referendum, but I'll just give you what I spoke to my dad, who's 93, and he's fought for a long time for recognition. And the most, I went to him the next day. The day before, he was full of hope. He believed in the Australian people. Even though that it was an uphill battle, he knew that he still hoped that people would see the sense in the rightness of giving recognition to our people. But the next day, he was devastated because he knew in his lifetime he'll never see recognition of our people in the Constitution. And that was very devastating for me to see your father cry. And it still upsets me today. And because my dad fought a long time, not only him, a lot of people, my nana, and they just believed in people that they would do the right thing. But as April and Aaron have said that Australian people are not educated. In our culture, Kaurna people culture, 70% minimum should know how to read and write. In that Australia culture, we're lucky to have 30% could read and write properly. That shows the big gap in what is known about our culture, because to survive in Kaurna culture, you had to know 28 subjects, you had to pass 5 ceremonies, initiations, to have the right to have your own family. But in Australia culture, you can get conned by 2 people or, a one leader that tells, as has been said, lies about our people and how Australian will be divided by the result. Well, I think, as Marcia said, it's an uphill battle. Truth is a hard thing, but you must still stand up and still speak it, because if you don't, you're not true to yourself. And that's what my nana always taught me. Always be true to yourself. Be proud who you are and where you come from. So we'll keep fighting for that truth.
Richard? Thank you. I was going to ask, my next question is, what do you think's next? And what sort of political leadership do we need?
I'm happy to have a go at that, Uncle Rod, and I think I did just in my last summary that it's going to take some time, and we've had as we always do, a field of commentary around what our next steps should be and what they should look like, and that's not foreign to black politics. The Uluru Statement from the Heart, I think, very respectfully, I think reflected what have been decades of a very kind gesture to the government of what we would like and how we wish to have control over our lives. And albeit the result of the referendum, the question remains. The fact that a people who have decisions made specifically about them should have a voice, should have a structure, a body to speak on those matters. The concept of reconciliation was so central to the campaign and the referendum, and the construct of reconciliation itself is built on this concept of strengthening relationships, and within our country it's highly motivated by the concept of race, around people that perhaps the status quo believe have been most hard done by. There are things that I've learnt through my upbringing, having grown up in the heart of land rights in the Northern Territory, following my dad as a young person to, my upbringing, I used to think about it as a sad thing, but it's probably, influenced the way that I think and respect and work through institutions and complexities. But having participated in discussions and been subject to, debates about the Northern Territory intervention, sitting with my father at many, land rights discussions, which we are about to embark upon again as the Commonwealth Government look at granting a mineral licence for Rum Jungle, which is the biggest uranium mine in Australia, which is still leaking. What I take from all of those experiences is that we've been highly coordinated and highly composed. We've always taken up our battles in masses, and we do stick with each other, albeit our diversity, our different experiences across all of our First Nations across Australia. We know and we stand up, we get up and we speak up. And I think that's something that's so empowering through perhaps my generation and even those younger than me, the masses of young people, not only Aboriginal, but, other citizens of this country that are taking up the fight and calling for action is something that I felt, has really warmed my heart after what has been a really devastating loss.
Yeah, okay. Next step. So I think what we've got to do, especially in South Australia, make the voice in South Australia work. So my nephew Dale, he's leading that, but we all got to be behind it, because if we show the nation that the voice can work in South Australia, maybe we can bring sense around the country. It's an uphill fight, but you got to start from somewhere. So we make it the best we can in South Australia and show that it can work. Let's stick together, work together, and believe in each other, because I always believe good will overcome bad in the long run. We've had a lot of bad for a long time. We need the good to come out and stand up and be strong and shine. Be proud of yourselves and what we stand for, because, as I said before, my nana always said, someone's got to do it and might as well be me. So stand up. Everyone, it's each other's responsibility, not just one or two, everyone's responsibility. Okay.
And also, there's another good saying, Rod, that for evil to succeed, good people say nothing. So it's really important for each and every one of us to show up. So, Aaron spoke about his connection to the Far West Coast. My family come from Ceduna Kunaba. So when you look at the 1967 referendum results back then, over 90% of that very small, rural, pastoral, settler community voted no. Same again on October the 14th, over 90% voted no. So with that said though, when you've been told no at the time of 1788, that there were no people here, told no, you can't have your land, no, you can't have your children, no, you can't have your history, no, you can't have your yes vote. It just makes us more determined about changing that course. And so for me, when we talk about how we have our voices heard, there are many ways to have our voices heard outside of constitutional recognition. The mere fact that I hold a role as Commissioner for Aboriginal Children and Young People with statutes, with independence, free from direction of the Crown, I have the ability to speak to Aboriginal children and young people directly, to hear from them, their voices about what matters to them. And I've heard from so many young Aboriginal people across South Australia about their hope for a better future. This level of radical optimism that they hold on to, that they can be that change, gives me great inspiration. And those are the words of leadership coming from the mouths of our babes. When I think about all the things that I've been involved in over the years, whether it be a public servant or the work that I've done in serving my community through a variety of Aboriginal community-controlled organisations, and that I still continue to do, what is at the centre of what we do is Aboriginal self-determination, that determination where we have control over our decision-making, control over our resources, that we have our Aboriginal voice centred around our children, our future, that we are able to bring the things that we need as a determined Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to make that difference. So it's about holding on to every opportunity, about driving that Aboriginal self-determination. So the question about what sort of political leadership, I actually think it's Aboriginal leadership, and relying on that to hold our truth in that space. For me, I think the whole outcome of the referendum really brought into question the strength of the reconciliation agenda. And it has made me question, the language that sits with that, getting back to the heart of what we need to do to drive outcomes for Aboriginal people. The whole closing the gap scope, what does that mean? And ensuring that we have the strength of our Aboriginal community-controlled sector in that, who are closest to our children and families and communities, who have Aboriginal governance, Aboriginal leadership and management, and the breadth and depth of an Aboriginal workforce to be able to centre our voice when it matters the most. So while definitely parts of our community feel the devastation, and that feeling will go on for a long time, I don't think we can quite get over it. If you speak to anyone who's had a profound effect of losing something that they hold dear to, that sense of loss and grief, that can stay with you forever, for a lifetime. But it's what we choose to do with that sense of loss. We can turn that, because we are resilient, and we draw upon that strength that we bring together as a united community of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with our allies to stand together and to show up in our most times of being needy. We will continue with the arguments and the struggles and the fight and the path towards treaty. We do truth-telling every day, whether it be what I do with my children, in my role that I have, holding truth in that space is critical. That's what I bring, and what all my black brethrens bring into any space when we're talking about bettering outcomes for Aboriginal people. So, rejection is really difficult to comprehend. It's very layered. And there's a part of me that is really angry. And I wonder if people actually know and understand what that looks like when it's very public, about feeling rejected for who you are, what you stand for, and what your aspirations and hopes are for your own people. Because that is what we were striving for, approaching the referendum. I was part of the dialogues with Aaron and our SA delegation. We were a formidable force, and we continue to be a formidable force with all those across every state and territory in this wonderful country that we call Australia. And sadly, we've just seen, I think, in the social media, that the result of the referendum has created a space for those who are a bit quiet to now reveal their true colours. So we've seen councils take very brave steps, mind you, to reject welcome to countries. So there is a challenge ahead. It's one that is going to be fought with lots of sensitivities, but approach with tenacity. So there is much to be said and many more conversations to be had about how we go forward. And for me, if we hold on to hope and optimism, which our children do, I say that is the strength that we continue to link ourselves to. Thank you.
My last question, actually, I think April's gone into it really well, was, there are parts of our community that are still feeling devastated by the result. So what advice would you give people about how they might recover and go forward? Rod?
In Port Adelaide, we got Aboriginal Community Centre called Kuriella, which means in our language place by the sea. But what we're encouraging to do is people to talk about their feelings, because if you hold feelings in, they just boil up and then they explode. I've had a pretty tough year myself with my mum being put in a nursing home, and it took me a lot of things to talk about that, because I'm very sort of not a lonely person, but I keep to myself a lot my feelings. But I do talk to a few people, and I think you got to talk to more people when you're feeling down. So in Port Adelaide, in Kuriella, we encourage people, but not only talk to our own people, talk to non-Aboriginal people, because it's only through keeping the dialogue alive of people talking and respecting one another and working together one another, we get to know each other better, and that's the way forward. Like in Port Adelaide, we're opening a new centre, like a cultural centre, in the next year or two, and that's about encouraging people to come and learn about our culture, because our culture is like over 60,000 years old. The wisdom of our elders is untouched, really, in the sense that the knowledge we have is incredible. And, at the university, we do a course called Indigenous Knowledges. We encourage international students to come along, but we should encourage more Australian kids to come along, because they should know about the knowledge of their people, their First Nations people of their country, because we got a lot to share. But as my dad said, they got to be ready to learn. And that's going to be a big battle, because the media and that has said they got nothing to learn from us. We got to overturn that. We got to stand up against that and say, no, we got a lot to share, but you got to come halfway and want us to teach you. But so we got to keep fighting. We got to keep standing up, as April said, and Marcia said also. Like it's a never-ending story of us having to prove who we are, where we come from. We come from here. We never come from anywhere else. This is our country. So all Australians should be proud of that. We're the longest living culture in the world. So, it's about time they grow up and believe in us.
I think they're both you know, both Auntie April and Uncle Rod have said it so beautifully. I think, you know, I really do try to internalise and reflect on all that I've experienced and all that I've been so fortunate to do, you know, even throughout my very short professional career. When I look at the result, and you know, Marcia spoke in depth about you know, the cohorts of voters and what that means, and particularly what that may mean moving forward. I am an eternal optimist, and I always have been. And you know, a part of that, I guess, is a real eagerness to always see the good in people. It's a trait that I've perhaps come to interrogate more than any other, you know, throughout my personal characteristics as I approach different things in life. There's a whole lot to be done around, you know, that the yes vote cohort, NGOs, big institutions, the big end of town, who through their support behind the campaign. And perhaps now have taken a comfy seat after the result. There is much to be done around harnessing those efforts and those energies towards our next steps. And, you know, next steps that are much more than mere, you know, symbolic or, you know, rhetoric. Closing the gap has, you know, reveals the, you know, the huge service hemorrhages that exist and impact Aboriginal people. And we're not talking about unique services, we're talking about universal services that every citizen should have access to. Unemployment, health, homelessness, youth crisis in every aspect of life haunt us. And, you know, as the Uluru Statement very eloquently stated, that it is the torment of our powerlessness. On a highly personal level, I think, and look at my grandfather, who has now passed, who lived a very long life to the age of 97, and the impact that his tireless advocacy, and, you know, the result that that's had on him and all of my elders. And, you know, I don't mind sharing. I'm in my very early 30s, and even I find myself extremely tired. It is a tough fight to fight. And it takes its toll. I have a 2-year-old daughter and another on the way, and it really haunts me to think that this is the type of world that they will grow up in, based with the same prejudices that I and many of my others have to experience, which in no way weigh up to the experiences of my parents and my grandparents. My advice is, as I always say, is you know, perhaps which is a bit different, and, you know, it's kind of perhaps evolving as I grow as well. What was originally kind of kill 'em with kindness, perhaps has taken a bit of a U-turn now. But, you know, this is everyone's responsibility. And in the same way that Aboriginal people, you know, have been resilient and you know, approach things in terms of collective impact, the responsibility has shifted. And there are fights that I won't fight anymore. And I think our brothers and sisters and newly arrived Australians have to start to address those things that impact us, because we can no longer do that alone.
I might just add, I grew up in Darwin, and Aaron's grandfather was also a very famous umpire. And I still argue I was pushed in the back. Now, please join me in thanking Professor Langton. Aaron, April and Rod for taking the time out and being available. Now, Professor Jenny Shaw's got a small gift for our speakers.
Marsha, can we get you back up on stage? Is that all right? Very, very small. Oh, lovely. Adelaide's own. These are nice ones. Thank you. I'll take that for you. Steve, can I get that one to you?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So, look, I'd now like to thank all of you for attending this event. Your support is very much appreciated. And I'd like you to now invite you to join us together for some light refreshments just over here in the lawns. There's things to eat and drink and some music now by Tilly again. So thank you very much and good evening.